everyone, I'm Becky Andrews and welcome to Walking Through Wilson. I'm here today with Tom Brashear. You are the Director of Development Services for the Wilson County government, and that includes planning, code, stormwater, all kinds of fun things.
Yes, ma'am.
And you are here today to talk to us a little bit about some upcoming public hearings about a new growth plan.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is no surprise because Wilson County, unless you're under a rock, you know we're growing at an exponential rate. So tell me a little bit about what this new growth plan is going to do.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I want to be clear, we have two different processes going on right now. We have the Growth Coordinating Committee, but we also have a land use plan amendment that we're doing in the county, and that's also in progress. This is not about the land use plan amendment. This is about the growth plan.
And what's the difference between those two?
Well, the growth plan is a function that involves all of the municipalities and the county government, as well as several of the utility districts in the county.
And that includes, when you say that, it includes Watertown, Mount Juliet, Lebanon all together.
And Wilson County.
Right.
And it can be requested at the behest of any of the jurisdictions, after which the county mayor is obliged to reconvene the county coordinating committee, or county growth coordinating committee. That county growth coordinating committee can discuss different things like maybe policy between county and city jurisdiction, or city and city jurisdiction, but most accurately, it has to do with establishing an actual extraterritorial growth boundary that also serves, in most cases, an extraterritorial planning region for subdivision review and things of that nature.
So why is this important?
Well, it's important.
New growth plan.
It's important because it establishes areas that a city could potentially grow into. It also establishes, such as this green shaded area, economic development corridors that the county may wish to lay out, which we've had one in the bottom half, in the south central portion of the county along the 840 corridor since 1990, roughly. But it establishes an area that cities can potentially grow into. By default, once the growth boundary is established, most of the time the state will go on and grant extraterritorial planning authority in those areas. So what that means is that instead, if you're in, for instance, this area, which Mount Juliet is proposing with this plan to take in, if it passes all of the legislative bodies and is accepted by the state, then Mount Juliet's Planning Commission would oversee subdivision development in this area,
and
whereas right now, the county's Regional Planning Commission oversees subdivision development there.
And that would mean sewer instead of
could.
septic? It could mean that?
It could mean that.
I know that's not a...
Most of the time that wouldn't happen unless the developer struck an agreement with the city to annex into the city in return for being provided public sewer, sanitary sewer.
Right. And then, so what else does that include too?
It would include giving Mount Juliet or Lebanon's Regional Planning Commission the right of recommendation for any rezoning that happens in the county if it's not going to be annexed. So if you lived or worked in this area and you had a piece of property you wanted to get rezoned, you would go through the city of Mount Juliet's
rather than the
county planning commission for a recommendation.
Right now, the darker shaded purple, those are considered Wilson County. I
Yes,
mean, it's in Mount Juliet,
and
but it would be, you wouldn't have to go through the city of Mount Juliet.
Right, at present.
At present.
But you would go through their regional planning commission for a recommendation to the county commission. Now, if they get annexed, that becomes a city function all the way to the city council. But if they're just talking about rezoning property to a county zone district, Mount Juliet's Planning Commission gets the right of recommendation, and it's the final word still rests with the county commission. They just have to consider Mount Juliet's Regional Planning Commission recommendation rather than the county's.
And you had mentioned that some of this was done prior to 2013, the original that.
Well, 2001 was about 1999, the state of Tennessee established a growth boundary law that required all counties and cities in the state to establish agreed upon growth boundaries.
And why is that?
There was a lot of dispute. I was actually in planning at that time, working in Hendersonville, and there were some areas just outside of existing cities that were trying to incorporate. There was a lot of dispute back and forth about whose jurisdiction people ought to fall within. And so at that time, they established a growth boundary law or growth that included the establishment of growth coordinating committees. And they also established some boundaries like you've got to be with at least 3 miles from any existing incorporated area if you're going to incorporate
Right.
a new city. So things like that happened in 1999, I believe. 2001, we adopted our first growth boundary. 2011, Mount Juliet requested to reconvene the Growth Coordinating Committee, and this lighter lavender color that you see is where their boundary and Lebanon's and Watertown's were established in the
Right.
darker color in 2013, and then subsequently here in 2022, Mount Juliet requested to reconvene the coordinating committee, and that's what we have before us today.
And this is, so you're here to talk about these public meetings. And
Yes.
this is where we're going to talk about all this stuff. And this is important for people to be there, but it's also important to know this is just a public hearing. It's not really,
It's a public input meeting,
Okay.
Or at least that's the way I'm viewing it. Mount Juliet, Lebanon, Watertown, and Wilson County will all be holding a public input meeting. My planning office oversees planning functions for Watertown and the county. So we will be responsible for holding at both a meeting at the county courthouse and one at Watertown City Hall, while Lebanon and Mount Juliet will be responsible for hosting the meetings in their
districts.
jurisdictions.
And so there's 4, right?
There's 4 meetings.
And the first is January 9th?
January 9th, and I believe that one is
Wilson County?
Wilson County. January 10th is Watertown's. January 11th is going to be at Charlie Downs Park, as I understand it, at the Panettone Room.
Yep.
For the city of Mount Juliet, which they'll host. And then January 19th will be the city of Lebanon's tentative date that they will be holding a public input meeting at Lebanon City Hall.
And so this is, hopefully we won't have bad weather. You never know in January or
no,
February,
you
but this is a good place to go and get
Yes.
some information on this and see how this is affecting the area you live in.
That's correct, and we can explain in more detail what it means if you live or work in those areas, what difference you may experience as
Right.
a result of being put in, for instance, Mount Juliet's growth area and planning region or Watertown's. Lebanon is really not changing a whole lot or not proposing to change a whole lot. I do understand there may be a few people that have an interest in talking to Lebanon about making some changes, but Lebanon in and of themselves have not proposed
yet.
any.
And so that's why you're doing the
Yes.
meetings, to just give people a chance to make comments and ask questions and
Yes.
explain to them how this is going to affect them.
Yes.
And so,
And we'll have public input forms that they can record their comments on, and we'll try to make sure that that gets back to the Growth Coordinating Committee. I should have said, this map that you see is the product of several meetings of the newly reconvened Growth Coordinating Committee over the past several months, discussing both policies and policy differences between the different jurisdictions, as well as possible needs for additional growth corridor for different cities. And this was the result of those cities coming back and proposing this to the county.
what if you can't attend the meetings?
If you
Do we have? I think that.
Yes,
are they
you're welcome
recorded?
to call. I would say probably your best bet would be to call any of the planning offices, whether it be the City of Lebanon, City of Mount Juliet, City of Watertown planning office, or you can call my office at 615-449-2836, and we'll do our best to explain, at least from our perspective, what this all means.
And if do they record the meetings though? Do they have like a live link set up? Do you know?
I do not know.
Okay.
I don't.
thought that
I've not arranged for a live link at our meetings
Okay.
at present.
but right now they can just call those
Yes,
phone
they
numbers.
can call those numbers.
And so the meetings, we've got the 10th, January 9th, 10th, 11th, and 19th. And we'll have a graphic up to show that, I think.
And after all of the public input is received, we hope to take that back to a meeting in February with the Growth Coordinating Committee, which should be a public meeting. It won't be necessarily one that the public will have an opportunity to provide input, but it will be a public meeting of the Growth Coordinating Committee.
You have a big job. So
Yes.
this has been going on, like how long has this been in the
Pro-
works?
Probably 6 to 8 months.
Okay, yeah, a lot. In Wilson County, no doubt, we're growing. And so will this growth plan, is it supposed to help with, how will it help like with the growth that we're having? I know we have traffic. Is that what it's meant to, is it meant to address
that's
any of
certainly-
that?
That's certainly something that can be talked about. I would posit that each individual's community's land use plan probably has a much more direct impact on those types of questions. I'll also say this, I think Mount Juliet, Lebanon, and Watertown, as well as the county, each have adequate planning services and planning staff. We all work well together. So I think regardless of where you wind up on this map, I think you can expect that you will get quality planning services. It's just a matter of
And
your
everybody's
perspective
just
of
a
which
phone call
one
away.
is preferential. That's correct.
Right. I mean, I've had to call you several times, and you've always called me back. So.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yes. No,
I'm
it's
glad
great.
I was able to fulfill that. at
Well, I mean, we're lucky to have good planning departments in this area, especially because of the growth. I think we would really be hurting if we didn't have that. So one more time, meetings, January 9th, that is going to be Wilson County's meeting. January 10th, Watertown.
Yes.
The 11th will be Mount Juliet, and the 19th is Lebanon, City of Lebanon.
Yes. And I believe all those are either at City Hall or the County Commission chambers, respectively, with the exception of Mount Juliet's, which I think
Charlie Daniels
they're going to do it. I think they're tentatively planning to do it at Panettone Room in Charlie Daniels Park.
Okay.
And all of them should start at or around 5 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. Tom, thank you so much for being here and letting us know this. I mean, it's
you.
always something to learn. It's very exciting and confusing for me. So I know that you guys kind of help explain it. And I'll see you in January at one of the meetings, I'm sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.